Yes, the question is that the bill be read a second time, and I call the honourable member for Barton.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Labor will support this bill in this place. This bill will enable the National Housing Finance Investment Corporation to provide guarantees to improve housing outcomes and undertake research into housing affordability, what the government calls the First Home Loan Deposit Scheme. The legislation does not address much of the detail and administration of the scheme, and this will be handled through the investment mandate and developed by the corporation. We know from the bill's explanatory memorandum and the government's other public commitments that the new scheme will allow first home buyers to purchase properties without the need to pay lenders' mortgage insurance or meet the standard 20% deposit requirement. Applicants will only have to provide 5% deposit, but there are some rules. The scheme is to be capped at 10,000 purchases per annum, and eligible applicants must have earned less than $125,000 in the previous financial year as a single or $200,000 as a couple. The new scheme will be funded through the Consolidated Revenue Fund. As the explanatory memorandum makes clear, the scheme will require an update to the NHIFICS investment mandate, and we understand that this will go through a process of public consultation. The Senate last week, Mr Deputy Speaker, voted to conduct an inquiry into this bill, which will report before the next sitting fortnight, and that inquiry may find that there are improvements which could be made to this bill. We look forward to the committee's findings and also hearing from the government as to how the scheme will be implemented. It is appropriate, Mr Deputy Speaker, that this bill is considered by a Senate committee because we must ensure that this new policy will provide a maximum benefit to first home buyers while appropriately managing the risk to the Commonwealth. It is also important— I'm just going to get a glass of water, Mr Speaker, Deputy Speaker. It is also important to remember that the government housing affordability has continued to worsen. That's why I move a second reading amendment standing in my name, that all the words after that be omitted with a view to substituting the following words. Whilst not declining to give the bill a second reading, the House notes that 1. Under this government, housing affordability has gotten worse, and as a result, 2. The percentage of Australians who own their own home has dropped to its lowest level since Robert Menzies was Prime Minister back in the 1960s. B. The number of Australians behind in their mortgage today is at its greatest level since the global financial crisis. And C. A report released last week by the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare showed that in 2017-18, over 1 million low-income households were in financial housing stress, and that 43.1% of low-income households renting in Australia are suffering rental stress. And D. There are more homeless Australians than ever before. Under this government, we have seen first-home buyers left behind. Today, the percentage of Australians who own their own home has dropped to its lowest level since Robert Menzies was Prime Minister back in the 60s. Of course, it is young people, people in their 20s and 30s, who are finding it hardest to get their foot into the property ladder. In Sydney, it takes more than 11 years to save for a standard 20% housing deposit. In Melbourne, it's more than 10. In Adelaide, it's more than 8. And in Brisbane and Perth, it's more than 7. This is cutting generations of Australians out of the housing market. As research released by the University of Sydney released last week revealed, whether someone owned property was the greatest indicator to someone's wealth. There are even specific ways to break up this system based on whether someone was an investor or homeowner, a mortgage holder or an outright owner. The lowest, according to this research, was renters and the homeless. Sorry, I beg your pardon, Mr Speaker. The lowest, according to this research, was renters and the homeless. This needs to be urgently addressed, and Labor looks forward to the Senate inquiry's findings of the proposed new scheme. It is not just first home buyers, though, who are doing it tough under this government. Today, the number of people in Australia that are behind in their mortgage today is at its highest level since the global financial crisis. This is extremely concerning given we are currently experiencing the lowest interest rates in decades. Yet when wages are flat and the cost of living continues to increase, is it any wonder that Australians are struggling to meet their repayments? Renters are doing it tough too. As a report by the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare showed last week, in 2017-18, 11.5% of households spent 30% to 50% of their gross income on housing costs, with another 5.5% spending 50% or more. Over 1 million to low-income households were in financial housing stress in 2017-18. Today we have more homeless Australians than ever before. The last census recorded the number of homeless Australians as more than 116,000. This is not good enough. There is no way to put a positive spin on this figure, as the Assistant Minister tried to. There is no way to put a positive spin on any of these figures. Labor is hopeful that this legislation and the subsequent policy may help to improve housing affordability issues and increase the number of first-home buyers. That is why I repeat, we are supporting the bill in this place. We look forward to the Senate Committee's findings with interest and will consider all the findings carefully when the bill is considered by the Senate.
Is the amendment seconded?
I second the amendment and reserve my right to speak.
Thank you. The original question was that this bill be now read a second time. For this, the Honourable Member for Barton has moved as an amendment